Say hi.
Hi.
Hi. So today's new school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so today we're going to work on doing some cooking, some batch cooking, right?
Yes.
Some freezer cooking. All right, you going to be my helper?
Yeah.
You gonna chop away? All right, let's do it. Today we have a lot of recipes that we're going to be using onions for. So I thought I'd show you how I prep my onions the most efficient way, as well as reducing crying. So here you see I have my onions on my cutting board, and the number one tip I have is to go through the process like an assembly line. So I first cut off the non-root end tip, and then I also cut the onion in half. And the next step will be peeling the onions all at once, putting them in a bowl, and then I'm going to start slicing them and then dicing them. So my number one tip is start with a sharp knife. You want to make sure it's sharp. And my number two tip is having a small fan like this to the side. This will blow the enzymes away from rising and going into your eyes, which will make you cry. Also, when you use a sharp knife, instead of crushing the onion, which releases more enzymes, you're slicing through it, so you're releasing less enzymes, which also helps you not cry as much. Now you can see that I showed you the root tip there. That's the tip that you want to leave intact. You don't want to separate that. Basically, that will hold the onion together, and you won't have bits and pieces of onions all over your cutting board while you're slicing and dicing. Now I've sliced one and I put it to the side, and then I'm grabbing another one and doing the same. This is kind of goes into the assembly line process that I was referring to, where you're doing one task at a time before you go to your next task. And that's a great tip I learned in culinary school to help get you through prepping as fast as possible. Now once I have them all sliced, I'm going to go back and start dicing them. Now to the side of that, you see I have a baking sheet that is lined with parchment paper, and that's where I'm going to be placing all of my onions that I'm prepping. And the onions that I don't end up using in a recipe, I'm going to leave out on the parchment paper, cover it with plastic wrap, and place it in the freezer. And the reason I do that is because onions freeze very well, and for me, I rather only chop onions once and have them stored in the freezer for future recipes, and having to pull out an onion and do the whole process every time a recipe calls for one. So that's the reason I do that. And also the reason why I put it on a baking sheet like that, I flatten it out, is because it freezes quicker that way. As well as once it freezes, they're individually frozen, like the little bits of onion. So therefore I could put them in a bag and only grab what I need for a recipe, and the onion is not one big old frozen clump in the freezer. It's actually separated. So now my next step is to start dicing them, and you can see that once I start dicing them, it goes pretty quickly. So those are my tips on how I prep onions, and I hope that some of these tips will help you when you have to prep any onions, and hopefully you also have a tear-free experience. And just to go over real quick, make sure that you're working in an assembly line process where you're doing one task at a time. Number two, make sure you're using a sharp knife. That helps you not only decrease the enzymes that you're releasing, but also keeps you safe because you're working with a dull knife. And usually when you work with a dull knife, you have to press harder on your produce before it's cutting, which could also lead to slipping and cutting yourself. And number three, have a small fan or use your ceiling fan, something where you're blowing the enzymes away from your eyes, which will help you keep the tears at bay. So I hope all these tips helped you. If you have any questions or would like to see anything else, future videos on how I prep produce, please let me know. Thanks for watching. Bye.